My name is Bernard Demczuk. I have a PhD in African American history and culture from the George Washington University. I am also Ben's Chili Bowl's historian, as well as the Howard Theater's resident historian. And I am also the chairman of the Spirit of Black DC, which is a nonprofit organization that has a website that concentrates on providing African American history and culture to everybody in Washington, D.C., because our job in the Spirit of Black D.C. is to preserve and celebrate the amazing, great, diverse, and extensive African American history here in Washington, D.C. I am the historian of Ben's Chili Bowl. What that means is that I am the curator of all of Ben's Chili Bowl's historic documents, photos, and papers. What that means is that all of those papers from the last 55, 60 years are at the George Washington University being preserved and being collected and being digitized for the entire world to see and study and understand how very important Ben's Chili Bowl is, not only as a hot dog joint, not only as a cultural center, not only as a community center, but also as a major business here in Washington, D.C. that affected the African American history and culture of Washington. Secondly, what I do is I teach African American history at the school that Walls in Washington, D.C., and also at Ballou High School. At Ballou High School, I do an African American history course through the study of film, particularly classic black cinema. And the third thing I do is I do, when needed, I do the history of the Howard Theater. But primarily, my work is in the what we refer to as the Spirit of Black DC. That is a website that brings African American history to everybody on a website called www.thespiritofblackdc.com. Well, I think primarily what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to bring African American history to all the DC public schools. It's interesting, and I'm not exactly sure about Cesar Chavez, but it's interesting that in general, DC public schools does not teach African American history. Now, African American history is woven into the general history curriculum of all public schools, but it is my opinion that because African American history is very rich, very diverse, very extensive, and it is so much a part of American history and has been taken out of American history for so long that there needs to be a freestanding course on the study of African American history and culture. Let me underline the word culture. I underline the word culture because in order to truly understand American history and to truly appreciate African American history, one must understand culture. Let's define culture for a second. Culture means music. It means dance. It means religion. It means sports. It means government and politics. It means cuisine and fashion and language. Culture really informs us of who we are as a society. And that culture is highly infused with African culture. And it comes to us through the Atlantic slave trade. And for us to truly appreciate American history, we need to appreciate Africa, and we need to appreciate African American history. For example, who doesn't like rock and roll? Who doesn't like hip hop? Who doesn't like the blues? Who doesn't like jazz? Where does that come from? That comes directly from Africa through the drum and through the African experience in the American South. So in order to understand our wonderful culture today, that everybody, the whole world loves American culture, the whole world loves our blue jeans. They love our food, they love our music, they love our blues, they love our jazz. All of that comes through Africa, from Africa, through the American slavery system and railing up to modern times. So it's in that sense that understanding culture, particularly black culture, really informs us of who we are as Americans. So one of the things that I'm trying to do with one of our campaigns is I'm trying to get all the DC public schools to seriously study African American history. Now, let me slow down for a second here and appreciate. one needs to understand that for 345 years, our history has been defined by two very horrible experiences in America. Number one is slavery for 246 years, and number two is Jim Crow violent oppression for 100 years. That's 345 years of an American history that is defined by racism and defined by white supremacy. It's not easy to teach that. It's not easy to teach slavery. It's not easy to teach Jim Crow violence. But it's important and it's necessary to understand it in order to understand race relations today. And so one of the things I'm trying to do with our campaign, is not just me, it's a lot of different scholars of African American history, is we're trying to get the DC public school system to appreciate how powerful and important it is to understand and analyze and study black history as a freestanding course. In other words, not just to study black history for a few hours in February, and to once again study over and over the speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King, which we all appreciate and love. But what about the other 345 years of history before Dr. King? Those were more profound and more defining of who we are as a people and as a country. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to appreciate how rich and diverse and wonderful African American history is. You know, Washington, D.C. is built on relationships. I mean, somebody once said that Washington, D.C. is a town of about 1,000 people who make Washington, D.C. run. Just about 1,000 people. Now, those 1,000 people who are actually the opinion makers, the 1,000 people who actually run the entire city. But in fact, our city is built on relationships. It's built on trust. It's built on honesty. It's built on values. It's built on kindness. One famous politician once said that all politics is local, but I take that a little bit further and I say that all politics is not only local, but it's personal. What does that mean? That means it's a personal relationship between one person and another. And that relationship is not worth anything unless it's built on trust and on honesty and on mutual respect with one another. Have ever achieved anything unless we have stood on the shoulders of our parents, our grandparents, our teachers, our advisors, our coaches, our counselors. When you're walking through a farm and you see a fence post and you see a turtle sitting on top of the fence post, how do you think that turtle got up there? The turtle did not fly up there, and that turtle did not walk up there. That turtle got put up there by somebody. And all of us at the top, going through school, going through college, going through whatever, getting a good job, you know, it's built on relationships. Somebody helped us along the way. So I think more important than anything we can do, besides our studies, and besides working hard, is developing good relationships with our teachers and our coaches and our professors and our friends. You know, I think that none of us make it alone, and we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. And relationships is really what it's all about. Resources is all about developing relationships and having the capacity. You here at Cesar Chavez, you have resources. Look at this wonderful library. Look at this great school. Look at this good campus you have. You have teachers, you have counselors, you have books, these are all resources. Every teacher, every counselor, every book, every video machine, every camera that you have, every microphone is a resource. And so they're all around us at all times. And guess what? Everybody wants you to use them, and everybody wants to develop their resources for you. So you have enormous, and plus you're in the nation's capital. You have the Library of Congress. You have the George Washington University. You have Howard University. You have the great libraries. You have the Moreland Spingarn Library of Howard. You have the Africana Research Center at GW. You have the Library of Congress. You have the African American Civil War Museum. You have Ben's Chili Bowl, which is a great resource of great African American history and culture. And so all the resources around you, all you have to do is reach out and touch them, and they're all yours. We all have challenges. Life is not a matter of going through without challenges. Life is a matter of experiencing the challenges, being knocked down, getting up again. I mean, challenges are with us at all times. I love challenges. Challenges make us stronger. They make us bigger. They make us smarter. And so challenges are things that I welcome. And I welcome, as a one-time athlete, obviously, when you get knocked down, the first thing you do is get right back up. And so challenges are a good thing. It makes us strong. Isn't there a popular song out these days called "If It Doesn't Kill You, It Makes You Stronger"? Isn't there something like that? Some popular song?
Kanye West.
I knew you knew what that song was. I'm just sort of saying, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And that's what challenges are. Challenges make us stronger. One of the best things you do to a plant in the wintertime is you cut the plant right back down to about 6 or 10 inches above the soil. You know why? Because it makes it stronger. Because the roots get stronger. And when it grows up in the spring and the summer, it becomes even bigger and better and more beautiful. That's what challenges are. The diversity of our city is our strength. I think the city would be totally boring if it was all white or all black or all purple. What's great about our city is that it's black and brown and white and green and blue. Our city is so diverse. Young and old, Jew, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, even non-believers. Our city is so diverse with beautiful people and beautiful colors. And I think when you embrace that diversity, and when you embrace all the multicultural experiences that we have, I love to understand Asian history and black history and Hispanic history and culture. I love to understand all of the various multicultural opportunities that we have to learn and grow. Every society can teach us something. Every people can teach us something. So I embrace the diversity of our city. We are stronger and better because we're diverse. I live in Shaw. I live in the historical African-American community of Washington, D.C., called Shaw. And Shaw is really an important story. Let's stop for a second about Shaw. Spelled S-H-A-W. How many people know what our community is named after? Who our community is named after? Most people identify Shaw as an historically black community, and it is. But do most people understand where the word comes from, Shaw? Some people might say, oh, it comes from Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Yes, but where does that name come from? Robert Gould Shaw was the commander of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry in the Civil War. Robert Gould Shaw was a white man. His father was Robert Gould Shaw, and his father was a very wealthy millionaire. In Boston, he owned a mill, a lumbering mill. And in Boston in 1863, his father, as a very wealthy person, a white person, could have bought his son out of the Civil War. But his father, Robert Gould Shaw's father, was an abolitionist. He believed in the abolition of slavery. And he taught his son that slavery was wrong. And during that time, you could actually give the federal government $300 and not have to go into the war, the Civil War. Now, the Civil War, as you probably know, was a very, very violent war. Over 750,000 young boys died in the Civil War. It was the worst war in American history. Of all the wars put together in American history, of all the wars put together, more young men died in the Civil War than all the other wars combined. That's how vicious that war was. But Robert Gould Shaw's father taught him abolition. And when his father said, son, you don't have to go to this war. I have the money to get you out. He said, no, Dad, I'm going to the war because I believe in fighting for the end of slavery. And Robert Gould Shaw was the commander of the 54th Massachusetts when they invaded Fort Wagner in South Carolina in 1864. And Robert Gould Shaw had the capacity and he had the authority to stand back on the hill and let his men charge the fort without him going. And he would have lived during that invasion of that fort. Except Robert Gould Shaw said, no, if my men are going to charge that fort, I'm going to lead the way. And he led the charge, and he took the first bullet through the heart, and he died right at the parapets of the fort, just like his men did. What's the moral of that story? The moral of that story is this. The black community of Shaw had the vision and had the wherewithal to name its black community after a heroic white commander who led the charge of black troops at Fort Wagner. And today, Shaw is named after Robert Gould Shaw. That's diversity. That's the strength of our community. I'd like to also let people know is that every Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9:30, I have a live radio show on the internet called The Spirit of Black America. The purpose of this live internet radio show is the celebration and preservation of African American history, and particularly DC Black history. People can access that show at any time. It's bliss.fm, BLIS.fm, and anybody can access it anytime, 24/7. And what the show is all about for 1 hour is the study of African American history and its celebration and its preservation. So one thing I'd like to suggest is that people go on bliss.fm and scroll down the shows to The Spirit of Black America and listen. You can see you've got dozens and dozens of shows to choose from. But most importantly, what I'd like to suggest is that the DC public school system teach African American history, but teach it from an Afrocentric perspective. Teaching from an Afrocentric perspective is also referred to as critical race theory. What does critical race theory mean? Critical race theory means analyzing and appreciating and understanding American history from the perspective of the African American, not from the perspective, with all due respect, of great dead white men. That means trying to understand American history not from George Washington's perspective, not from Thomas Jefferson's perspective, not even from Abraham Lincoln's perspective, but to understand it from the perspective of the slave, understand it from the perspective of the field worker, understand it from the perspective of the teacher, from the African American teacher that for 150 years has put teaching at the top of the list of her priorities. So to understand African American history from the perspective of African Americans is much different than understanding it from the perspective of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a great president. He was a great thinker. He was a great leader. He was a great statesman. He wrote the words of the Declaration of Independence. Those words were, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights. And among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are great words. But we forget that same man who wrote those words held slaves and raped his slave women. And with one of those women, he had 6 children. Her name was Sally Hemings. I think we need to understand American history from the slave woman's perspective and her children, not just from Thomas Jefferson's perspective. George Washington was a great president and a great general. But when he died, he owned 317 slaves, and he didn't free them. And Abraham Lincoln was a great president. But when he signed that Emancipation Proclamation, not one person was free. Not one person. It took the United States colored troops, and it took the 209,000 black soldiers, 38,000 died, 26 won the Congressional Medal of Honor, to end slavery in the South 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. So I want to study American history from the black soldier's perspective. I want to study it from the slave woman perspective that has been raped. I want to study black history from the people's perspective, not from the perspective of our traditional history books. That's what I would prefer that we concentrate on in studying black history. Thank you very much.